I'm Rob Spieldenner. I work on the engineering tools team, specifically the developer productivity team at Netflix. I'm going to be talking about Nebula plugins, which are the Netflix build team's suite of Gradle plugins, and a little bit of the work that we've looked into to switch one of them over to the new model and start using TestKit over nebula-test. So brought to you by there. You can find all of our plugins up on nebula-plugins.github.io, a whole suite of Apache licensed plugins. We love community contributions, and hopefully they're useful to you in your build process on a day-to-day basis. Some of the new ones that we've worked on this year include the Lint plugin that John spoke about yesterday, the Gradle resolution rules plugin, and the dependency recommender plugin. For the Lint plugin, we wanted to enable people throughout the company to keep their build scripts up to date. Many teams would ignore deprecations that we put in, or just not go about taking the time to remove some constructs that we removed or plugins that we renamed. So we wrote a plugin that allows people to go and just run Gradle lint on their file. It'll do an ASM kind of level scraping of the build.gradle file using the CodeNarc tool, and let them know, all right, that plugin has changed its name back then. We no longer use a publications block. We apply a specific plugin for that. Or you are depending on various third-party libraries that you're not even using in your code. This is going to help us enable distributed refactoring throughout the company, and some of the work that we're going to do throughout this year on it will hopefully also allow people to lint their Java, Scala, Clojure code and automatically have fixes in here like the fixed Gradle lint. So for our teams now, they can run fixed Gradle lint and then run git diff, and you're going to see the whole list of differences in the code. And then one of the other things, if you have a question about one of the individual plugins, you might as well ask when I'm talking about it so that we can get any questions while they're fresh. We also created the Gradle resolution rules plugin this year. We were seeing various problems with how dependencies were used throughout the company. We have a main platform library that really needs to be aligned in version, and a lot of teams were just depending on a high-level umbrella project and then pulling in an extra 10 or 15 dependencies that they didn't need. We want all the teams to switch to just pulling in the 3 or 4 that they need, but then this would cause problems for our ed services when they're resolving a whole slew of different teams' libraries. You're going to have a massive transitive closure with 5 to 10 to 15 different versions of that platform library, and dealing with all the conflict resolution and various conflicts that can just exist with a SKU of even a minor version. So we had this to help us get all of that stuff in place and fix some other dependency problems. So one of the first rules is the replace rule. The plugin lets you just write a JSON file and publish a jar somewhere that all of your teams can consume and keep up to date. So this basically saves people from having to know the Gradle syntax to go and do a module replacement. So in this case, Google Collections with Guava. If your project only depended on Google Collections, we would leave it alone and not swap out the library. But if they happen to both be present, we want everybody to use Guava. So it's just a different syntax, basically to have all of those JSON file in one place with all of your rules for your team to do that built-in Gradle thing instead of having multiple teams have to put the same rule in place. We also have a hard substitute rule. So when we were transitioning from Java 6 to Java 7, Java 8, you have the wonder of the ASM library, which embeds all kinds of fun things that are non-bytecode compatible with later versions. So if there's a substitute rule, we're going to replace no matter what. We see the old ASM, we're going to replace you with the new. We also added deny rules. So we want to have teams stop using bundles, so we can fail people's builds if they have a first order dependency on something like Jersey Bundle. This also lets our security team let us know, it's like, all right, that Netflix My Library at that version has a massive security flaw in it. If anybody has a direct dependency on that, just do not allow the build to proceed. So this lets us, once we get things out of the graph, like Jersey Bundle, we can keep them out of the graph. And just help the security team clean up the whole dependency graph. We also have a reject rule. This uses the reject syntax that is built into the resolution rules of Gradle itself. Basically, you're letting somebody know this is kind of a bad version. So if you're trying to pick up latest.release or 2.plus, skip it. It's not going to automatically fail the build if you have a direct hard dependency on there. So maybe a team has worked around a bug in this version. But it lets that team let other teams know, skip it, don't pull it in. So if I was going to do a 2.plus and there was a 2.0.0, it would pick that instead of this 2.0.1. We also added align rules. This is for those cases, like all those platform libraries that all need to be at 2.1000 or AWS-Java-SDK, which really need to be at the same version. You have the minor little conflicts if you're pulling in version 15 of S3 and version 12 of SQS or something. There's various syntax here. You can align just a whole group. You can align multiple groups. You can have includes. So say everybody at Netflix uses the Netflix group. You can just list the 5 or 10 dependencies in that family that you want to align. You could also do excludes if there happens to be there's one library in Jackson that I know doesn't match this, this pattern. We also created the Gradle Dependency Recommender plugin. This allows people to just completely leave dependencies off. So a lot of teams at Netflix don't care which version of Guava or the logger library that they're picking up. It's like platform or edge, just one of the teams on one of the sides of the thing, tell me what version to use, and I'll work with it. So like the Spring Dependency plugin, you can just, I list com.google.guava, and it'll pick the version from that BOM or a map that you configure in your file. And then we have a whole slew of other Nebula plugins that are hopefully still useful to this day. We have the Gradle Dependency Lock plugin. This lets people list a whole bunch of dynamic dependencies in their build.gradle and produce a lock that they're updated at some kind of pace. So many teams will have a nightly job that goes and creates a new lock, runs their tests, maybe their canaries, and only commits if those pass. This allows a lot of teams were seeing issues with just broken builds throughout the day. So a team updated a dependency, it was broken, and then lots of teams couldn't get any work done for the day. So they have a good lock, they only update when they're good to go for the day. So only have one person on your team deal with the dependency conflict problems. We have the OS package plugin. Netflix deploys Debians onto AMIs, so having a plugin that makes it easy for people to create these is quite useful. It now has hooks into automatically creating daemon tool scripts to spin up your application and make sure it keeps on running. And it also will work with the Gradle application plugin. So if you want to, if you tend to run your app doing Gradle W run, this would take that script file and the war and put them in the right place so it could go on and package the deb so all that would run. We also have a publishing plugin. So The built-in Maven-publish and Ivy-publish that are in Gradle have a couple of, I don't know, little bits that aren't quite all the way that we want them to be. So we put these plugins together to do some of the extra things that we want. It adds various metadata to the POM or the Ivy descriptor. We always want teams to publish a known good version. So when I built this and tested it, I was using this exact version of Guava, this exact version of Platform. So the Ivy files or POM files won't have latest.release or a dynamic range in them. They'll have the specific version. And then this will also create a known good publication so that people don't have that boilerplate publishing section in all of their builds. We also created the metrics plugin. Now that like Gradle Enterprise is out there and that -d scan capability, we'll see how much we continue using this. But up till now, it's given us a nice signal when we release a new version of our company-wide overarching plugin. Have we introduced a whole lot of new failures? Have build times increased? Things like that. So on each build, we get a little, it prints out a receipt at the end. So go to this URL with this hash, and then we could look up the data in Elasticache. And then our data scientists have been nice enough to help us create some Tableau dashboards and Kibana dashboards so we can monitor those things. One of the new things we're doing with it is collecting lint violations, so we know how many people are violating the rule, ignoring the rule. And we can also collect things like who's using various tasks. So earlier this year, it's like, we don't think anybody's using this, but let's make sure. So metrics let us know that absolutely no one called it, so we renamed it to something that didn't conflict so people could, once again, use a short name. So the initials of a task that we were hiding. We also collect plugin version and Gradle version so we can see the number of different versions of our Nebula overarching plugin that is in use throughout the company and locate the teams that are still way behind. And there's the Gradle info plugin. This lets us collect various metadata and use it in the other plugins. So the publishing plugin will take the data from there, put it into the POM or the Ivy. Metrics uses the info plugin for its source of truth. All right, so the work looking at the ModelBased plugin. So the existing way, you implement a plugin with a project and you apply. The new way is you extend rule source and you have a various list of annotations to describe what you're doing. We've found that it's a pretty good replacement for existing extensions. You just create a managed interface with the various methods. So instead of just listing the property, you have to do the getters and the setters depending on if it's setting or not, final or not. But it's a pretty drop-in replacement for extensions. You can then set various defaults on there. So instead of having to do all kinds of hackery in your plugin where you would check if this property is already set on the command line. Oh no, is the extension set? And then I have to late bind it in my tool apply. I can just have a default set in my rule source and set whichever properties that aren't set to a known good value. And then task creation is still pretty clear. You have that mutate annotation for when you are changing the publishing extension, the task container, things like that. So you send it in, the list of all of the tasks. I might configure my task based on my domain object that I created earlier. And then, yeah, I just call task.create just like before and can do whatever I need to. The problems that I've seen with it is a lot of our plugins build on each other. So there'll be an overarching plugin that applies 6 or 10 other plugins. And I haven't seen a great way to do that with the the rule source yet. I might be missing something, of course, but for now, I'm thinking of having this kind of hybrid solution where you'd have a plugin that could do the applies of multiple rule sources, and then either have a static class with the rules in them if they're only going to be used here, or just have that be another separate class that the plugin could apply multiples of them. All right. Any questions about the model?
Can you go back to the first slide where you were comparing and contrasting the extension versus, yeah. Okay.
So yeah, it's just for the plugin way, the apply method is pretty much imperative. I'm going to create my whatever 1 or 3 tasks. I'm going to configure extensions. I might do all kinds of lookups on. It's like I want a command line override of the properties. So you're having to do all of that in your apply method and kind of having to break that up into little testable chunks. With the rule source, you can do a couple of different things. So instead of that extension that you need to check, there's this well-known model thing. So from your build.gradle script, you do model, brace, and then which ones you're changing. So that's how you would configure it like an extension. You could also have various Gradle properties that you can check. So if you annotate a method with the @model, you can check various things and set that on your model object. You'd basically, so like in this example with my domain, you'd have an @model void, whatever method name that you really want, pass in that my domain thing. And in that method, you could check, okay, I want to check this URL here, and I want to see if there's a property set. And it's doing from what I've seen, it is ordering the methods in a sensible order. So the mutate things happen after all of the model methods and after all of the defaults methods. So things. The little I've used with it, I've been able to skip that, but I haven't dropped into any of our more complicated plugins that. So like Dependency Lock used to use after evaluate really heavily because it needed to make sure it was last to actually apply a lock. It's still written in the old plugin style, but we've switched it to do a configuration before resolve. So it's a little better. There's still some ordering things. And then when we convert it, the resolution rules and the recommender over to this, we'll see if there's still an interaction. So right now we're planning to write kind of a glue plugin for everything that does that so we can enforce some extra ordering. Because like right now it's like, oh, the Spring recommender plugin interacts with us, so we have to do some magic to make sure that we don't break when it's there or make sure we're ordering things correctly. Yes?
Do you have any heuristics for what type of plugins you're going to use the new model-based plugin for? Going to try all of them till it doesn't work?
The goal would be to slowly change them over. Initially, when I proposed the talk, I was thinking that the model would be more solid for Gradle 3.0, but it looks like it's still in flux a little bit. But as we're moving towards that, I would like to get them all to use this, and then we'll definitely send the Gradle team, and probably at this next Gradle Summit, people can ask me more questions about it. Basically, when we found out that the model wasn't going to be like hard set in stone, we kind of pushed it off to work on other plugins and other internal things. So I've just like a brief look at switching a couple of the plugins to it, not all of them. So yeah, the hard bit will be figuring out the right way to, how can rule sources build on each other? So like our publishing one, it's like, maybe I just want to create the Nebula publication. Maybe I want to go and list these. Right. How do I build up those rules? Some teams might want us to resolve their dependencies. Some might not. And having that one plugin that can apply a set of things is quite useful. So we'll see where the rules go for that bit. Yeah.
Given this, given this drastic change to the way that you're coding the plugin, how far back does this still apply to in terms of Gradle versions?
I do not know, but at least TestKit will make that easier to test. And then we might be I don't know, a little mean on that one, and it's like everybody internally is at 2.14. We support that, and we'll keep the old ones out there published that still work, but we might not like backport rule-based to anything previous. I mean, most of our work tends to be on pretty close to where the current is, and just we're not going to delete them from bin tray or Maven Central. But just like OS package RPM, we don't use RPMs internally, so it's just like as the community sends us pull requests, we'll pull it in. So hopefully we'll do the same for any of the old plugins that don't work with the rule-based. All right. So switching to the TestKit. There's no real changes if you're just doing a unit test of your plugin. You're still going to use Project Builder, build up enough of that model to apply plugins, set properties, and make sure the right thing happens. All the big changes are really in the functional tests, or what we used to call integration specs. It's close to a drop-in replacement. The biggest gotcha that I've run into is when you have it open in IntelliJ or Eclipse, you need to make sure whenever you modify the names of plugins or rule sources and or add new ones, you need to make sure you run the plugin under test metadata task again, so that they're generated so they can be found on the class path. I don't know if it comes with TestKit or if it's part of Java-Gradle-plugin. But it's one of those two. It's probably the Java-Gradle plugin. One of the things I'm debating currently is if I want to re-implement our run task successfully thing from nebula-test. It's definitely less verbose than the long create and builder method. But the problem being, if I occasionally want to mess with things in that builder pattern, and then I forget what that syntax is and have to look it up. So are there any opinions throughout the room if you think the shorter syntax is more useful than maybe forgetting when you want to mess with the project directory or plugin class path?
Are you guys thinking about rewriting it to use the test?
The current thought is we either pull request the chunks out of nebula-test, so like a couple of the helper methods that we've put together into to the Gradle core, like Ben asked for when he was talking about TestKit earlier yesterday. And then I've promised them at some point to port the dependency generation code into TestKit as a whole instead of having that be hanging off.
That'd be ideal. I don't know if you looked into what that would take.
It's basically having free time at work, which is.
Does it conceivably seem possible? So
Yeah, it's totally possible. So the quick thought is nebula-test might get pared down to just the couple of helper classes that get rid of a little of the boilerplate and have that dependency stuff. And as that stuff gets into TestKit, it'll eventually, the hope is nebula-test is like an empty repo and just go look at TestKit. But we wouldn't delete the old versions again. So.
it's definitely a better syntax.
So I'm personally really excited for that with Gradle version ability. Up to now, there is a plugin out there that lets you set up a external thing to test against a variety of different Gradle versions. And so for a couple of our plugins, it's like, okay, we'll have a test that runs a chunk of our plugin code on lots of different versions to see if we're still backwards compatible. This is a little nicer. You can do a with Gradle version, and then in Spec or some other test framework that lets you do data-driven, just pass in all of the versions that you care about being compatible with. All right, so right now, this is our helper class for the functional specs. We like to have our build.gradle a directory per test placed in the build directory so we can look at it when the test fails. Just finding the random temporary folder somewhere is a little difficult, so basically under the build directory, we'll name it whatever the class path is, and then whatever the test name is, and then create build.gradle and settings.gradle, just so we don't have to do that again, get rid of a little bit of boilerplate. And then also add a multi-project functional spec, so make it easy to add the various sub-projects and then find where that build.gradle is, where that directory is going to be. Because most of the time, like I don't need to go in the settings.gradle and I include this. I just give me that directory so I can drop in some source files or some things like that. So yeah, we're going to, in the short term, have helper classes and methods and the dependency creation logic. Before that goes up into TestKit as a whole, we really need to, so right now I'm doing a hack and running Gradle in the background to generate dependencies. And I should just write out the POM and IB files directly, because it's also going to let people do various things like add excludes to them. All right, and so what's next for us? A lot of the development work we're doing internally on our various tools, Astrid, which is what we use to look at dependencies, and Niagara, which is what kind of a CI replacement tool and lets us, hopefully let us build, when somebody releases a tool, build all their downstreams and flow back up the information to them. Those are both written in Kotlin. So a lot of our plugins will probably move to Kotlin in the next year. And then, yeah, spending the time, as we touch plugins, we'll probably move their tests over to TestKit. And then, yeah, continue to evaluate the new model. Thanks. So any questions about the plugins as a whole, what we've been working on, or Netflix?
Curious, just what is your external layers sort of policy? I read it on your website once upon a time. On your website. What in general, other tasks you want folks to work on?
We do not have a to-do list. The GitHub issues have a couple of open things. In general, we're open to any contribution. I don't know if we're going to add a CLA.
I guess I don't want to start writing code that's just absolutely contrary to the way you guys think, right? So
Yeah.
So that it would not get accepted. So I'm just wondering what's the just email you guys?
Email would be probably good. Open an issue to start a discussion. We do have Gitter rooms that we occasionally look at. But yeah, reach out if you don't know if it would be accepted. I mean, most of the time it's the couple of RPM things that we haven't picked up is because there was still a team on RPM, and we didn't have a good way to test if those changes would break them. So now that they're off of that, we will move a little faster on those pull requests. But most of the rest, we're hopefully fairly good about. Like, we'd like it if there was a test here, or yeah, just kind of stick to the coding style. All right. Thanks.